I stood there, frozen in disbelief, as the doctor's words echoed in my head. Chlamydia. How could this be happening? I'd never been with anyone but Sarah. The room seemed to spin, and I felt like I was going to be sick. My mind raced back to that morning. Sarah's strange behavior, her lack of underwear, her cryptic words, it all made sense now, in the worst possible way. The trust I'd built our entire marriage on shattered in an instant. 15 years. 2 beautiful daughters, countless memories, all tainted now by this betrayal. I'd always prided myself on being a good husband, a faithful partner. I'd waited until our wedding night, for crying out loud, and this is what I get in return. I left the clinic in a daze, barely aware of my surroundings. My shift wasn't over, but there was no way I could focus on work now. I called my supervisor, made up some excuse about feeling ill. It wasn't far from the truth. As I drove home, anger started to replace the shock. How long had this been going on? Who was she sleeping with? Did our friends know? Had I been the laughingstock of our social circle without even realizing it? I pulled into my parents' driveway, my hands shaking as I turned off the ignition. The familiar sight of their modest, well-kept home usually brought comfort, but today it felt like a lifeline in a storm I never saw coming. Dad opened the door before I could even knock. "Alan, son, what's wrong?" The concern in his voice nearly broke me. Mum appeared behind him, wiping her hands on her apron. Come in. I just made a fresh pot of coffee." I followed them into the kitchen, the scent of coffee and Mum's homemade cookies filling the air. It was all so normal, so comforting. How could I shatter their world along with mine? We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where we'd shared countless family meals. Mum poured coffee while Dad studied my face. I wrapped my hands around the warm mug, trying to steady myself. "Son, you're worrying us. What's happened?" I took a deep breath. "Sarah's given me an STD." The words hung in the air like a bomb. Mum's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. Dad's face hardened, his jaw clenching. "Are you certain?" he asked, his voice low and controlled. I nodded, unable to meet their eyes. "Got the results today. Chlamydia. I've never been with anyone but Sarah." Mum reached out, placing her hand over mine. "Oh, Alan. I'm so sorry." Dad stood up abruptly, pacing the kitchen. "This is grounds for divorce, son. You know that, right? Our faith is clear on this." I felt a mix of relief and dread at his words. Part of me had known this was coming, but hearing it said out loud made it real. "I know, Dad. I don't know what to do. The girls." Mum squeezed my hand. "We're here for you, Alan. For you and the girls. Whatever you need." Dad stopped pacing, resting his hand on my shoulder. "You need to protect yourself now, son. And those girls, Sarah's made her choice. Now you need to make yours." I nodded, feeling a strange calm settle over me. With my parents' support, I could face this. I could protect my daughters. I could rebuild. "What's my next step?" I asked, looking up at my father. I felt like I was moving on autopilot as I drove home. The weight of what I'd just learned pressed down on me, making it hard to breathe. Sarah's betrayal played on loop in my mind, each repetition another knife to the heart. Pulling into our driveway, I sat in the car for a moment, gathering my strength. I had to face my girls now, had to be strong for them. But how could I look at them without seeing Sarah's lies? I walked into the house, calling out, "Lorna? Gloria? Can you come down here, please?" Their footsteps thundered down the stairs, and I plastered on a smile that felt more like a grimace. "Hey girls, we need to talk." Lorna, always perceptive, narrowed her eyes. "What's wrong, Dad?" "Nothing's wrong," I lied, hating myself for it. "But you're going to stay with Grandma and Grandpa for a few days. Pack your bags, okay?" Gloria's face fell. "But why? Did we do something wrong?" "No, sweetheart," I said, pulling her into a hug. "You've done nothing wrong. It's grown-up stuff. I promise I'll explain everything soon." As they packed, I paced the living room, my mind racing. Earlier I contacted my attorney Emma. Had a lot of things to think about. Emma's suggestion about DNA tests echoed in my head. It felt wrong, invasive, but I knew it was necessary. When the girls came back down, bags in hand, I steeled myself for what I had to do. "Girls, I need to ask you something important," I began, my voice shaking. "I need you to swab your cheeks for a DNA test. It's to help with some legal stuff." Lorna's eyes widened. Legal stuff? Dad, what's going on? Are you and Mum getting divorced? The directness of her question hit me like a punch to the gut. I couldn't lie to them anymore. Yes, honey. I'm sorry, but yes, your mum and we're getting divorced. Gloria burst into tears and I pulled both of them close, my own eyes stinging. I'm so sorry, girls. I love you both so much. You're my priority always. As I held them, I felt a mixture of grief and determination. Sarah had betrayed us all, but I'd be damned if I let her hurt our daughters any more than she already had. I hung up the phone, my hand trembling. Emma's voice echoed in my ears, each word another nail in the coffin of my marriage. The evidence was overwhelming. My Sarah, had betrayed me in ways I couldn't have imagined. I sat there numb as Emma's words painted a picture of my wife's infidelity. She hired private investigator and what he collected was heartbreaking. Multiple men, audio recordings, videos, photos. Each detail felt like a punch to the gut. With shaking hands, I pressed play on one of the recordings. Sarah's laughter, once a sound that brought me joy, now cut through me like a knife. Alan? He's so clueless, her voice dripped with mockery. You should see him with his Bible and his rules. So boring. So easy to fool. I gripped the arm of the chair, my knuckles turning white. The Sarah I knew, the woman I'd loved for 15 years, was a stranger to me now. And the kid's a man's voice asked. Sarah's dismissive tone made my blood run cold. They're fine. Alan can deal with them. I need my fun. I slammed the laptop shut, unable to listen anymore. Rage and grief warred inside me, threatening to tear me apart. How could she do this? To me? To our daughters? The clock ticked away as I waited for Sarah to come home. I rehearsed what I'd say, how I'd confront her with the truth. But as the hours passed, my anger gave way to a cold, hard resolve. The shrill ring of the phone cut through the silence. Grace Hospital. My heart dropped. Mr. Miller? Your wife's been in an accident. The world tilted on its axis. Sarah, hit by a motorcycle. Critical condition. Coma. I grabbed my keys, my mind a whirlwind. The drive to the hospital was a blur. Anger and concern battled within me. She'd betrayed me, mocked me, dismissed our children. But she was still their mother. The ICU was eerily quiet. I stood outside her room, peering through the glass. Sarah lay there, bruised and broken, machines beeping steadily. She looked small, vulnerable. Nothing like the woman who'd laughed at my expense just hours ago. I stepped inside, my emotions a tangled mess. Despite everything, seeing her like this stirred something in me. I sank into the chair beside her bed, burying my face in my hands. I stood there, staring at Sarah's broken body. The steady beep of the heart monitor was the only sound in the sterile hospital room. My wife. No, the woman I thought was my wife lay before me, unrecognizable. Bandages covered most of her body, her left leg encased in a bulky cast. Her face was so swollen I could barely make out her features. My hand trembled as I reached for my wedding ring. 15 years of memories flashed through my mind as I slowly slid it off my finger. The weight of it in my palm felt heavier than ever before. I pulled out an envelope from my jacket pocket. Inside were the damning photos Emma had given me, evidence of Sarah's betrayal. I added my ring to the envelope, sealing away the remnants of our marriage. With a deep breath, I scribbled a note on a scrap of paper. Sarah, we're done, 4 simple words that carried the weight of shattered trust and broken vows. As I placed the envelope on her bedside table, I felt a strange sense of finality. Even in her comatose state, I needed this closure. The Sarah I'd loved, the woman I had built a life with, was gone long before this accident. I looked at her one last time. Despite everything, a part of me ached seeing her so vulnerable. But the betrayal ran too deep. Whatever love I once had for her was buried beneath layers of lies and deceit. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the room. The woman lying in that hospital bed wasn't my Sarah anymore. She hadn't been for a long time. I stood in the doorway of Sarah's new apartment, watching as the nurse helped her settle in. 3 weeks had passed since the accident, and she'd finally woken from her coma. The sight of her, bruised and broken, didn't stir the sympathy I once would have felt. Instead, I felt nothing but a cold detachment. Alan, she croaked, her eyes meeting mine. I couldn't bear to look at her for long. I stepped forward, clutching a manila envelope. "Here are the divorce papers," I said, my voice flat. "I'm seeking full custody of the girls." Sarah's face crumpled. "Alan, please. I'm so sorry. Can we talk about this?" I shook my head. "There's nothing to talk about. You made your choices. These are the consequences." I explained how I'd split our assets, transferring half into her new account, minus the rent for this place. It was more than she deserved, but I wanted this over with quickly. The divorce proceedings were a blur. Emma, now my lawyer, had gathered all the evidence needed. Sarah's hidden bank account, her affairs, her casual disregard for our marriage, it all came to light in the courtroom. I watched as Sarah's shoulders slumped further with each revelation. When the judge granted me full custody of Lorna and Gloria, with Sarah only allowed limited visitation, I felt a mixture of relief and sadness. This wasn't how I'd imagined our family would end up, but I knew it was for the best. As we left the courtroom, Sarah tried to catch my eye one last time, but I walked past her without a glance. The woman I'd loved, the mother of my children, was gone. In her place stood a stranger who'd torn our lives apart. Time flew and I never thought I'd be here, a single father trying to piece our lives back together after Sarah's betrayal tore everything apart. The girls, my precious Lorna and Gloria, they're hurting so much. I see it in their eyes, the pain and confusion they're struggling to process. We moved into this new house last week. It's closer to my parents, which has been a godsend. Mum's been over almost every day, helping with meals and just being there for the girls. I'm grateful, but it's also a stark reminder of how much our lives have changed. The therapist says the girls are making progress, but it's slow going. Lorna's become so quiet, nothing like the chatty teenager she used to be, and Gloria, she puts on a brave face, but I've heard her crying in her room at night. It breaks my heart, knowing I can't fix this for them. Sarah's visitations are tense, to say the least. The girls are polite, but there's a wall there now. They don't run to hug her like they used to. Instead, they stand back, guarded. I watch from a distance, my own emotions a jumbled mess of anger and pity. But we're finding our way. Last night we had a movie night, just the three of us. For a moment, as we laughed at some silly joke in the film, it felt normal. Like we could be okay. It's these small moments that give me hope. I'm trying to be both mother and father now. It's not easy. I've had to learn to braid hair and navigate conversations about boys and periods. But seeing the girls smile, even if it's just for a moment, makes it all worth it. We're a team now, the three of us. It's not the family I imagined, but it's ours, and I'll do whatever it takes to protect it. It's been a year since the divorce, and I'm finally starting to feel like I'm on solid ground again. The girls and I have settled into our new routine, and though it hasn't been easy, we're making progress. The other day I got a call from Sarah. My stomach clenched when I saw her name on the screen. Part of me wanted to ignore it, but I knew I had to answer for the girls' sake. "Alan, I was hoping we could talk about the girls," she said, her voice hesitant. "I've been doing a lot of thinking, and I want to spend more time with them." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Sarah, we have a custody agreement in place." I know, she rushed to say. "But I've changed, Alan. I've been going to therapy, working on myself. I miss them so much." I couldn't help but scoff. Changed? It's only been a year, Sarah. That's not nearly enough time to undo the damage you've caused? Despite my skepticism, I agreed to discuss it with the girls. Their reactions were mixed. Lorna, always the more sensitive one, seemed cautiously optimistic. Gloria, on the other hand, barely looked up from her phone when I mentioned it. In the end, I decided to allow more visits, but on my terms. I made it clear to Sarah that this wasn't a second chance for her, it was about the girls. The first few visits were awkward, to say the least. I dropped the girls off at Sarah's apartment, and they'd return home quiet and withdrawn. It was clear that the bond between them had been severely damaged. As for me, I kept my distance. Sarah tried to engage me in conversation during drop-offs and pickups, but I kept things brief and to the point. I had no interest in letting her back into my life. A few weeks ago, I got some news that lifted a weight off my shoulders I didn't even realize I was carrying. My HIV test came back negative. I sat in my car in the clinic parking lot, letting out a breath I felt like I'd been holding for a year. With that final thread of anxiety cut, I feel like I can truly move forward. My focus is on my career and my girls now. I'm not ready to date yet, but for the first time in a long time I feel content.